Let's call this one what it is. I want more views.
So Captain Marvel zapped him right between the eyes.
90s nostalgia is officially here. Maybe. At the time of this recording, Captain Marvel has been #1 at the box office for 2 consecutive weeks, and shows no signs of slowing down. Given the way that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has taken old songs and thrust them back into the limelight with some of their previous movies, that can only mean one thing. The 90s are gonna be everywhere all over again. Or maybe not, and who cares either way, really. But as the 1000th most popular 90s music channel on YouTube, at least until someone else comes along and makes a much better one, I'm pretty much obligated to make a video about it. Now, this video is not going to reveal my thoughts about the movie Captain Marvel. You can get your fix of reactionary bad takes anywhere else. The only thing I'm concerned with is, what 90s songs were used in Captain Marvel? And how did the movie use them? And how would I rank them from worst to best? Hey, good question. I guess we'll just have to watch the rest of the video to find out. Oh yeah, spoilers for Captain Marvel, by the way. This song is at the bottom mainly because it's not a 90s song. I'm pretty sure I like some Lita Ford stuff, not that I'm familiar with a lot of it, but I've certainly always been aware of her, and in all that time I can't recall ever having an adverse reaction to hearing her music. She's just always sort of there. Also, this song is only used for a brief karaoke flashback, so you could easily miss it if you're not watching very closely. So because it's not very prominently featured, and because it's not from the 90s, it lands at the bottom spot pretty much by default. Now, I don't remember hearing this song in the movie, but The Existence of Heart reminds me that prior to the 90s, actual famous female rock musicians were pretty few and far between. It was gonna have to be either them or Blondie, basically. Or the Pretenders. Or the B-52s. Or Pat Benatar. Okay, there were more of them than I thought, but my point is, in the 90s, women's voices and perspectives suddenly took the rock world by storm. There is a future video to be made about that, how not only were there more women in rock music during the 90s than there ever had been before, but it was to the point where they were dominating the genre for a pretty good stretch. You can't really imagine the Lilith Fair taking place during any other decade and being as successful as it was. But I'm getting off track. I've never really had very strong feelings about Heart, but I do think that this song has a cool acoustic guitar intro. So even though it is also not a 90s song, I am ranking it next up from the bottom. Or if that's not fair, you can just say this and Lita Ford are tied for last. I don't really care. I have never liked this song. I guess to me it doesn't seem very empowering. It's always just seemed kind of whiny to me. It's not even a song about fighting sexism so much as it is simply acknowledging that sexism exists. I always wanted this song to go a little beyond that. To make matters worse, this song is placed at pretty much the big third act action set piece moment of the movie. If they needed a rousing feminist anthem from the 90s to accompany this moment, there are so many better songs they could have chosen. Hell, there are better No Doubt songs they could have chosen. This one just doesn't work for me.
Come as you are, as you were, as I want.
When I started this series, I made a promise. I made a promise to myself that I would never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, make a video about Nirvana. And it's not because I don't like Nirvana. This show is supposed to be a vision of 90s music that doesn't just regurgitate all the common cliches. My goal has always been to go a little deeper than that. If I didn't feel like I had a somewhat unique perspective to offer with these videos, I wouldn't bother making them. And there are 2 basic approaches you can take if you're trying to come up with a unique perspective. You can either try talking about a subject that hasn't been completely beaten to death beyond the possibility of revisionism, or you can try to come up with a fresh idea about a well-known subject. Nirvana are similar to the Beatles in that it's just flat out impossible to say anything about them that isn't a total cliche. Beyond that, there are aspects of the Nirvana story that are troubling for me, and I kinda feel like by continuing to elevate the band above anybody else from the same era, we are irresponsibly romanticizing what should just be a senselessly tragic legacy, and by doing so, perpetuating a myth that I find pretty gross and ugly. Let's just say that for me, continuing to celebrate Nirvana at this point feels uncomfortably close to a 13 Reasons Why type of situation. And I'm fairly certain Kurt would be disgusted if he could see the degree to which we still continue to revere his old band. But anyway, now that I've alienated everyone who will watch this video, let me just say that the way this song is used in the movie is about as inelegant as it can be. It's one of the times that the music really tries to call attention to itself, whether it has anything to do with the story at that moment or not. The only reason it's not ranked lower than it is because at least it's not Teen Spirit. In fact, it's just about the one Nirvana song you could comfortably slot into a commercial Hollywood movie without exposing the absurdity of it. So in that sense, it's a good choice, given that it's the softest non-acoustic Nirvana song that you could choose. But given that the scene takes place in the character's head, and this song would have come out when she wasn't even on Earth, its placement in the movie is pretty questionable. Like, it's clearly there just for filmmaking purposes rather than anything that serves a narrative.
Understand how the lost card is played, but somehow the vital connection is made.
This is another choice that kind of bewilders me. Were Elastica even ever all that big? I mainly just remember them from that Beavis and Butthead episode that showed their video.
Well, if these chicks asked you to get naked and be in their video, would you do it? Yeah.
By the way, if you don't know, Elastica got a lot of grief from people at the time, because this song apparently steals the riff from Three Girl Rumba by the punk band Wire.
Think of a number, don't think of an answer.
From what I can gather, Elastica were a lot bigger in their native UK than they were in the United States. Again, this is just another instance where they could have picked a more appropriate and well-known song for the scene, but they didn't. Like, you only hear it in the background of a bar scene or something, and could have just as easily been replaced by Cannonball by the Breeders.
Oh, make me over.
This one is the big end credits song. It's not the worst choice for these purposes, but it's not my favorite whole song either. I like Malibu a lot better. But it's not upbeat enough, so I can understand why they didn't use it. But still, listen to the first line of Malibu and tell me that it doesn't fit better thematically than the lyrics to Celebrity Skin.
Crash and burn, all the stars explode tonight.
And I definitely do think that Hole deserve a prominent spot on the soundtrack. Just maybe not end credits prominence? You can keep the whole song somewhere, but as an alternate end credits choice, may I suggest Volcano Girls by Veruca Salt.
I'm only happy when it rains. I'm only happy when...
And I'm never going to be unhappy to hear this song in any context. In the movie, it's used as a kickoff to a road trip scene. I guess they're playing up the contrast between the dry, empty desert and the dark, rainy theme of the song. This one works pretty well for me, even though they don't play very much of it. The only garbage song I could possibly propose as an alternate would be Push It, but I understand not wanting to make the song choice too anachronistic for this scene.
If you believe they put a man on the moon, man on the moon.
So if you're keeping track, every song in this movie has a female singer except for the one Nirvana song and the one REM song. And if they had to make only 2 exceptions, those are probably the best choices they could have made. My only issue with the use of this song is that you can barely hear it. Basically, it just plays in the background during a dinner scene. If you're going to use this song, at least make it audible. But yeah, love this song, love REM, no other problems with it otherwise.
Cause his mama taught him that.
I got a good man, what a mighty good man.
Okay, this is more like it. Please see my Salt and Pepper video, link in the description, for some old, rambling, and poorly articulated thoughts about this song and about Salt and Pepper in general. So I am going to teach you a new vocabulary word today, and it is called diegetic. This is a film term used to refer to use of music that actually exists within the world of the story, as opposed to just appearing on the soundtrack as though it were part of the score. Most of the songs used in this movie are used in a non-diegetic way, meaning that the characters aren't the ones hearing the song, it's just there for the benefit of the audience. This one is an exception. In fact, this is the first 90s song that appears in the movie, if I'm not mistaken. As an introduction to 90s music as a whole, I cannot object to this on any level. If they were trying to portray what it would realistically be like to turn on the radio to a random station in the 90s, they couldn't have done any better. Another diegetic use of music, and once again I will direct you to my video on Des'ree, linked in the description for my further thoughts on this song. They chose to use it during a fairly emotional moment in the story. I think it's when Carol is being reunited with her best friend on Earth, whom she doesn't remember and who thought that she was dead. So it definitely fits the mood of the scene that they were attempting to establish. Actually, this would also make a good end credits song, but there's really no bad place to use it. It fulfills a lot of purposes and appeals to all audiences in a way that only 90s music can. So it serves as the best representation of the 90s on the soundtrack, with only one exception.
Believe in yourself, the rest is up to me, yeah.
Go chasing waterfalls, please.
I really need to do a video about TLC. This is the 3rd time that they have shown up in a mixtape video, as if to reiterate just how unavoidable and monstrously huge they were during the 90s, just in case you needed to be reminded. I think this shows up about halfway through the movie, during another scene transition when Carol and Fury are driving off to some secret government facility. So it doesn't really have anything to do with the story, unless you wanted to make a stretch and say that it serves as some kind of foreshadowing about the danger they're about to encounter. But you don't really need an excuse to use a TLC song. Anytime you need something iconic, something authentic, and something that absolutely nails the setting of the time and place you're attempting to portray, this is your go-to. Don't just take my word for it. TLC were the biggest thing ever, with such a rabid following that their third album was just called Fan Mail. If you ever make a movie that takes place in the 90s and there are no TLC songs in the soundtrack, I'm just going to assume that you weren't there at the time. So in conclusion, this movie barely qualifies as a 90s period piece overall, and that extends to its use of music. American Graffiti, this ain't. I think there's like one scene that takes place in a Blockbuster, and then later on they're downloading an audio file off of a CD-ROM or something, and there's this visual joke about how long it's taking to load. It is very easy to forget when this is supposed to be taking place. So the soundtrack has to do a lot of the heavy lifting of reminding you that this is at least technically a 90s movie, and sometimes it really succeeds, and the choices are perfect. But there are just as many choices that I find confusing or ridiculous, and ultimately serve to perpetuate a narrative of 90s music that does not match my own personal experience. I guess at this point I just have to admit that I'm fighting a losing battle here. When people think of 90s music, they are invariably going to remember grunge and alternative rock first and foremost. No amount of counter-programming is going to change this. I really should just give up. Unfortunately, I do not enjoy talking about these types of bands or doing videos about them, so I'll just keep on doing my Don Quixote thing here. Getting nowhere, making videos only I want to see, not taking it too personally. Please subscribe.